They didn't miss the target, they outsmarted it. During World War II, American air gunners were taught to aim behind enemy fighters, a strange, counterintuitive tactic that turned them into deadly marksmen and doubled their kill rate in the skies. The lesson in the sky: how a split second saved lives. December 12th, 1943. Over Bremen, Germany. 30,000 feet up, the world was a frozen battlefield. The waist gunner of a B-17 Flying Fortress, Sergeant William "Red" Harkins, pressed his cheek against the icy steel of his Browning M2, 50 caliber. His breath fogged the glass blister beside him. The bomber shuddered under the stress of flak bursts and freezing air. Below, the city burned like embers in a black sea. Then he saw them, specks rising fast from the clouds. Focke-Wulf, 190 seconds. 4 of them, weaving in tight formation, sunlight glinting off their wings as they climbed toward the bomber's stream. Bandits! 9 o'clock low. The call came through the interphone. Harkins gritted his teeth. He knew the instinct: aim at the plane, squeeze the trigger, and hope. But his gunnery instructor's voice, from the Nevada desert, still echoed in his mind. If you see the enemy in your sights, you're already behind. He adjusted, leading the target behind, not ahead. The tracers flew, curving upward through the thin air. One burst struck the enemy fighter's wing root, another caught the fuselage. The 4190 burst into flame and spiraled down. Harkins had done the unthinkable. He'd aimed behind the plane and hit it square. The paradox that changed the air war. To understand this strange tactic, you have to rewind back to the gunnery ranges of the American Southwest, months before Harkins ever set foot in Europe. In the barren expanse of Tonopah, Nevada, young men fresh from farms and factories were learning to shoot at the sky. The U.S. Army Air Forces called it Flexible Gunnery School. Temperatures soared by day, froze by night. The air smelled of oil, dust, and cordite. Instructors used moving targets on wires, then towed sleeves behind aircraft. It wasn't marksmanship, it was mathematics. Every second, a German fighter could cross 200 yards of sky. Bullets took a full second to reach their target. That meant 1 second too late was the difference between a hit and a miss. Most trainees failed their first few runs. They couldn't grasp why they were missing by so much. But the problem wasn't their trigger finger, it was their eyes. An attacking fighter at 400 miles per hour didn't stay in one place. The key wasn't to aim where it was, but where it would be. And surprisingly, that meant aiming behind the image of the plane in the gun sight. Why? Because from a bomber's moving position, the illusion of speed played tricks on the human eye. The Browning's bullets, leaving at 2,900 feet per second, had to intersect a constantly shifting target that was not only moving laterally, but diving or climbing, rolling or banking. It wasn't instinct, it was geometry. The science of death in the skies. By mid-1943, American engineers realized that standard reflex sights weren't enough. They began to integrate computing gun sights, mechanical predictors that compensated for lead, speed, and range. At the core of this system was one principle: lag pursuit. The gunner aimed behind the apparent path of the target, so that the bullets, factoring in closing speed and time of flight, would collide with the enemy's true future position. It sounded backward, even absurd, but testing proved otherwise. When instructors ran comparative trials at Tyndall Field in Kingman, they discovered that gunners who aimed behind hit nearly twice as often. To master it, trainees spent hours in synthetic trainers like the jam-handy gunnery simulators, early mechanical computers that projected enemy aircraft onto screens. They practiced with dummy triggers, adjusting for speed and deflection until the counter on the console lit up. Hit confirmed. It was part science, part psychology. The Army Air Forces knew that under combat stress, instinct took over. So they trained that instinct out of men, rebuilt it from the ground up, baptism by fire. By the time the 8th Air Force launched its deep raids over Germany, Regensburg, Schweinfurt, Bremen, the new doctrine was spreading. Gunners used the offset method instinctively, and the results were undeniable. German pilots began reporting something strange in their after-action debriefs. "The Americans fire too soon," one Luftwaffe officer wrote. "Their tracers always seem to pass behind our wings, yet we are hit." They couldn't understand it. They thought the Americans were missing. In truth, they were watching ballistic prediction in action, the invisible math of war playing out at 30,000 feet. Harkins reloaded, his hands numb and trembling. More fighters closed in, black crosses flashing on silver wings. He exhaled slowly, remembering the desert wind and the words of his old instructor. "Trust the lag. Don't chase the plane, make the plane chase your bullets." He smiled grimly, aimed once more behind the diving German fighter, and squeezed. The sky lit up. The Nevada Crucible building, the deadliest marksman in the sky. Tonopah, Nevada summer, 1943. The desert shimmered in 110-degree heat as young airmen lined up behind their Browning .50 caliber guns, sweating through khaki uniforms. In the distance, a moving target zipped across the horizon, a silhouette of a fighter, painted black against a backdrop of sand and sagebrush. "Track it, don't jerk," barked Staff Sergeant Robert "Pappy" Gilson, one of the most feared instructors in the Army Air Force's flexible gunnery school. Each trainee wore goggles and headsets, their fingers tense on the triggers of mounted Brownings connected to film cameras instead of live ammo. When they fired, the camera recorded the tracer path on 16mm film, later analyzed frame by frame in dark rooms. What the footage showed shocked most rookies. They were always shooting too soon, too directly, or too high. The bullet streaked harmlessly past the target, a split second behind the aircraft's true path. The human brain, they learned, couldn't naturally predict motion at 400 miles per hour. So the Air Forces rewired it. The birth of the lead computation. At the center of the new system was a humble piece of equipment, the K-14 computing gun sight, a mechanical marvel of springs and mirrors. It looked simple, but it did what no human brain could, under stress, calculate deflection angles in real time. The gunner would dial in the target's wingspan using a small knob. Inside the sight, gyroscopes spun, translating that input into a predicted lead point, a glowing dot floating not on the target, but behind it. That's where the gunner fired. When paired with the Browning's blistering rate of fire, nearly 800 rounds per minute, the K-14 turned every airman into a walking ballistics computer. By late 1944, this system had matured into a doctrine: don't aim to kill the plane, aim to kill its future. The invisible classroom above Europe. The first to test this doctrine in combat were crews of the 100th Bomb Group, the Bloody 100th. Over targets like Münster and Hanover, they faced Luftwaffe fighters coming in head-on, firing 20mm cannons. A head-on pass lasted less than 3 seconds, barely enough time to shout a warning, let alone aim. Yet, by focusing their tracers behind the incoming plane's image, gunners found their bullets intersecting perfectly with the attacker's trajectory. Combat reports confirmed it. Fired approximately 100 rounds per burst. Observed hits on Mi-109's cockpit and wing. Enemy aircraft disintegrated midair. Crews who survived the missions swore by the method. Others didn't come back at all, proof that mastery wasn't just academic, it was survival. Each mission refined their instinct. Gunners shared tricks scribbled in logbooks. 2 wingspans behind on a diving 190. Aim aft of cockpit, trust tracer curve. Fire in rhythm, not panic. The doctrine spread across the 8th and 15th Air Forces like whispered gospel. The science behind the madness. To outsiders, the idea still sounded wrong. Even Luftwaffe intelligence intercepted training manuals and misinterpreted them, believing it to be an intentional deception campaign. But in the cold arithmetic of ballistics, it made perfect sense. At 30,000 feet, air density dropped, and bullet drag changed. A .50 caliber round fired from a B 17 could take over 1 second to reach a target 700 yards away, long enough for a fighter to change position by several hundred feet. By aiming behind, gunners compensated for that delay. They weren't shooting where the enemy was, they were shooting where the enemy's path would intersect with a string of tracers in motion. It was the difference between firing at motion and firing with motion, between guessing and calculating. The moment that defined the doctrine. March 6, 1944. The first daylight raid on Berlin. Hundreds of B-17 seconds roared over Germany's heart, leaving contrails like white scars across the sky. The Luftwaffe threw everything they had. Me 109 seconds, 190 seconds, even twin-engine Bf 110 seconds loaded with rockets. Inside the lead bomber, waist gunner Red Harkins, the same man from Bremen, scanned the swarm closing in. Tracer rounds streaked past his canopy. A flash of cannon fire hit a nearby bomber, tearing off a wing. The falling fortress became a tumbling torch in the sky. But Harkins didn't flinch. He saw a Messerschmitt diving straight for them. The old instinct to center the target surged up again. He forced it down, exhaled, and shifted the sight behind the sleek nose of the 109. He squeezed the trigger. The twin Brownings roared, their rhythm vibrating through the airframe. The tracers seemed to arc too far behind until, a heartbeat later, the Me-109's engine erupted in a ball of flame. The fighter disintegrated before it could fire a single shot. Over the intercom, someone shouted, "Direct hit! He's gone!" Harkins didn't smile. He just whispered, "Nevada was right." The legacy of the behind-the-target doctrine. By 1945, American air gunners had achieved one of the highest kill-to-loss ratios in aviation history. The numbers told the story. For every 10 bombers destroyed, German forces lost nearly 20 fighters. The tactic, once ridiculed as counterintuitive, became the cornerstone of U.S. aerial gunnery training for decades. The same predictive logic influenced everything from jet interceptors to modern missile systems. What began as a mathematical curiosity in the Nevada desert became a weaponized philosophy, one that saved lives, confused enemies, and turned ordinary men into masters of impossible timing. Back over Europe, as the smoke cleared and the bombers turned for home, Sergeant Harkins looked down at the gray landscape below the wreckage of planes scattered across the snow. He didn't think of numbers or angles then, only of the words that kept him alive. Don't aim where he is. Aim where he'll be when your bullet gets there. The doctrine that defied instinct had just rewritten the rules of air combat forever.